Judy, go ahead if you can hear me.
Steve, have you taught past classes here before?
Yeah, not in this room, but
Yeah, right. On what topic then?
a variety of topics, local environmental issues,
You
gentrification.
did you do anything on Wendell Berry? Anything?
I have, but not for HAS.
Okay, I
I've
see.
done 2 retreats for different organizations when I was there. So, preview of coming attractions, if you want to do something, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Welcome to Steve Baumer-Prediger's class on Earthkeeping and Character, Exploring a Christian Ecological Virtue Ethic. Steve's no stranger to many of you. He's spoken in HAS before in several classes. He has earned a BA from Hope College, a master's in philosophy degree from the Institute of Christian Studies in Toronto, Master's of Divinity degree from Fuller Theological Seminary, and a PhD from the University of Chicago. He is the Leonard and Marjorie Moss Professor of Reformed Theology at Hope College and oversees the Environmental Studies minor. He's also written a book called For the Beauty of the Earth, a Christian Vision for Creation Care, and a number of other books. Welcome, Steve Baumer-Prediger.
Thank you, Judy, and Kim and all the others from HASP who've made this event possible. Let me get the technology up and going. Can you hear okay? Okay. Come on in. Feel free to join us. Let me grab these handouts. There you go. All right, it's great to be with you. Thank you again, Judy, for that introduction. I love being at Hope College and HASP. I know my in-laws are regular attendees at most of these gatherings over the years, and HASP has been a blessing to a great many people in the Holland community. So I just want to say thank you to Kim and all the others who work with HASP. You've heard about me, but I want to learn about you. Let's do some introductions, and we'll start here with Judy and kind of move our way around to the back. Name and one thing you like about HASP. And then we'll go online. You guys are going to get your chance to answer that question. Introduce yourself in just a minute. Go ahead, Judy.
Okay, I'm Judy Carr, and what I like about HASP is the opportunity to make a lot of new friends with a lot of different people. I have cherished those friendships over the years.
I'm David Brower, and I've hung out with Steve and a couple other occasions, so it's always a delight. And HASP gives me the opportunity to do classes like this and to teach classes like I just did on In the Beginning, Creation Stories.
Oh, okay.
Speak loudly into
Great,
the
thank you.
microphone, friends.
My name is Ann Milponger, and I second especially Judy's thoughts, but I love the way it keeps my mind going on such a wonderful variety of topics.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm Anita Nyheis, and I'm new to HASP this summer. And
Welcome.
And I appreciate the wide variety of courses.
Okay.
I'm Terry Nyheis.
Hi, Terry.
Like she said, relocated here recently, and appreciate a way to meet other people that are also curious about things.
Okay. Great. Welcome.
I'm Phyllis Huff, and I love HASP, especially because I get to learn about so many new and different things.
That's my definition of heaven. We just keep learning about all kinds of stuff. In person. No digital, no Zoom needed there.
I'm Marilyn Wickens, and I like HASP. I'm a fairly new member. This is my second year if you count the pandemic.
Yeah.
It just seems to pick up so many things that interest me.
Well, great. Thank you. Welcome.
I'm Kathy Beal. I just like to learn, and I'm thankful for HASP because it got me through COVID with some sanity.
We won't ask how much sanity. Okay.
I'm Sharon Arnsworth, and I echo all the learning things, but one of my favorite things is coming up soon. I get to put together the HASP calendar, and it's a jigsaw puzzle of fun.
I'm Suzanne Harrington, and it's great to be with my generation.
Uh-huh.
And where do you get to meet people your
Yeah.
generation?
Yeah.
And the invigoration of my brain, I've given up on my body, but my brain.
Do we want to take in some of the Zoomers as well?
Yes.
Or not?
Yes.
How do you want to do that, Steve?
I don't know. Let's just start. Is this everyone, or there are other folks as well?
I'm sure there are a lot more.
Okay. Sue, introduce yourself. Sue Bolander.
I'm Sue Bolander. I've been a member of
You need
HASP.
to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Can't hear you.
And I love the learning of all kinds of different subjects and interacting with my
Okay.
peers. Just,
Hey, Dave, are you there?
learning
Can
with-
you?
I am.
We can't hear Dave either.
We're unmuted.
Okay, we can hear Sue. I'm not sure why you can't in the classroom, but
Okay. All right, we're having technical problems here. We can't hear you.
hold on.
So maybe next week we'll be. Okay. Yeah, if more than one is muted, it may be on our end and not on theirs. Hold on just a second. The joys of technology.
Chosen deliberately to
Oh, okay.
You're pushing our technological limits.
Well, I'm sorry.
Because those of us on Zoom, Mary Heisman, I see you. Could you hear Sue when she was talking?
Pardon?
Could you hear Sue Bolander?
I could hear Sue.
Okay, so those of us on Zoom are hearing it.
Fasten your seatbelts.
So give us about 60 seconds and we'll figure that out.
Can someone unmute themselves and talk? It looks like Mary, you're unmuted. Can you speak?
Sue, try talking again.
Okay, I'm Sue Bolander.
All
I've been
right.
All
You got
good.
it.
Keep going.
Thank
Keep
you,
going, Sue.
Susan.
a member of HASP since about 2005 when I moved to Holland. And I've taken many, many different classes about things that I love learning about in areas that I didn't knew nothing. So it's been a great experience. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Sue. Okay. Yeah, David, you're up next.
Yeah,
Name
Dave
one thing
Zord.
you love about HASP.
Steve and I have been members of Hope's faculty for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I enjoy HASP because I'm always open to learning something new.
Wonderful. Good to see your face. Glad you joined us.
Thanks, Steve.
Mary, you're up.
Who?
You.
Okay. Mary Heitzman, member of HASP, love to learn and love to meet new people and love to hear Steve.
All right. Great. Hey, I
I'm just
recognize
getting
that.
acquainted.
Yeah. Cal, you're up. No, you heard me. Cal, you're up. Introduce yourself. Yeah. There's Barb. How about Kath? Oh, here we go. Okay.
Well, I have a problem.
Cal and Barb, welcome. We're doing introductions. Would you
They need to unmute themselves.
Yeah, you need to unmute yourself. on the computer. Should be right on the bottom. Mute, unmute.
Hey, Wally, can you unmute yourself? Wally, let's hear from Wally.
Trying to get Carol.
Wally's muted too.
Steve, can you hear us?
Oh, there we are.
Yes, talk. Hi, Ken Barb.
Hi,
Hi.
All right, here we go. Hey, introduce yourself to everyone else.
Barb and Cal Balma. And we enjoyed HASP in the past. And this is our first re-entry.
Okay, great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Who's next? Kathy Kennedy?
Is mute.
Hi, my name's Kathy Kennedy, and I'm brand new to HASP, and I'm very excited about the courses that they offer. Really think that there's a wide variety of classes. Looking forward to taking lots of them. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to this class and welcome to HASP.
Thank you.
Who have I? Patty Brink?
Wally, can you unmute yourself? Your hand's up.
Yes,
Here's Patty's just unmuted.
I love learning such a wide variety of things. Thank you.
Okay, love learning. There's a common theme here. Who's up next? Wally, are you there? Can you hear us? Unmute yourself. Introduce yourself.
Hello, Steve.
Yeah.
This is Wally. I've been a HASP member for about 20-some years. It's one of the best organizations in this whole county, or the whole state, I would say.
Can we
I'm
quote
so
you on
glad
that?
I'm in there. I'm learning so much from everybody. So I'm looking
Okay,
forward
great.
to Steve's presentation.
I'm glad you joined us.
Thank you.
Yeah, Marilyn.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Justice, and I also love learning about a wide variety of things through HASP and even through different formats. So
Okay,
thanks.
great. Welcome. Glad you could join us. Who are we missing here? Anyone who's not introduced yourself? Karen?
Yep, my name's Karen, and I am new to HASP just this year.
Okay.
I'm an information junkie and knew that this was the place for me as soon as I retired. So here I am, and I'm loving it.
Wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thomas Husman? Man of the house? Are you there? iPad Thomas?
Just seeing.
Yeah, your hand's raised, but you're muted. iPad Thomas Husman? All right. Anyone else we missed? Got everybody? Okay. All right. Well, again, welcome to everyone. Oh, we got another person snuck in the door, didn't see you, back to the door. Introduce yourself briefly. I know who you are, but not everyone else does. Okay. And one reason you love HASP.
My name is Don Triesenberg. I love HASP because I love listening to all the great presentations.
Yes.
Even listen to me.
Okay. Great. I think that's everyone, both here and online. Okay. I think we're good with the introductions. Thank you. All right. Yeah, go ahead. Put the PowerPoint up. Relax. There are only 3 slides. There's nothing fancy here. I try to keep it real simple.
Mute.
Just, yeah, go to one of the others. Or there you go. That's better. Yep. Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much, Kim. No, it isn't. Just wanted it. Wanted to make sure the clicker worked before you left. Okay, there we go. All right, sweet. Technological savior at work. Okay, thanks. Thank you. You have a handout, the green handout for those of you in the room. For those of you online, you should see a slide that just basically describes this 3-week-long course, meeting from 1 to 2:30 today, and a week from today, and 2 weeks from today. Earthkeeping and Character, Exploring a Christian Ecological Virtue Ethic is the title, and I've taken that directly from my latest book, which came out last year, and that the basis of which that was why I was invited to give this class. It's with Baker Academic from Grand Rapids, Michigan, their headquarters, so you can purchase the book at the Hope Bookstore if you want to, or just go to Baker Academic's website, or even go on Amazon Books. All those ways are ways you can purchase the book if you wish to, though you don't need to if you want to take this class. Here's the description, the paragraph there. To properly care for our home planet, I and lots of other people, including an increasingly large number of Christians, argue we need to cultivate certain virtues in our homes, schools, churches, workplaces, neighborhoods, and cities. In this class, we'll explore the components of a Christian ecological virtue ethic. So it's an ethic, it's a virtue ethic, it's an ecological virtue ethic, and it's a Christian ecological virtue ethic, a very particular kind of ethic. We'll be focusing on these virtues. Later today, wonder and humility, self-control and wisdom, justice and love, courage and hope. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what's a virtue and what are vices and what's a virtue ethic, and then we'll focus a bit on that first pair of virtues that I mentioned, wonder and humility. Next week we'll focus on self-control, wisdom, justice, and love, virtues that show up in virtually everyone's list, from Plato to Aristotle to Augustine to Aquinas to contemporary thinkers about this issue. And then 2 weeks from today, ecological virtues we need, like courage and hope. And then we'll also talk about cultivating ecological virtues in everyday life. And we'll be focusing in 2 weeks from now on chapters 5 and 6 in the book. And chapter 6 is simply my attempt to describe, it's called Digging In, Becoming a Person of Character, describe 4 or 5 different organizations and people I know who are running them. Some are church camps, local organizations here in West Michigan, international creation care organizations that are each in their own way attempting to shape people so that they are people of courage and hope, justice and love, wonder and humility, etc. And you'll recognize some of these folks and places in chapter 6, this last chapter of the book, since I talk about the Outdoor Discovery Center, Makatawa Greenway, for example. So that's a sort of outline of this course, this class in the next 2 weeks. So reading for next class, if you do happen to have the book, read chapters 3 and 4. Today we'll be talking about chapters 1 and 2. And again, if you don't have the book, that's not absolutely necessary, but that's just your reading assignment for a week from today. Every chapter begins and ends with a story, and this is the story that I begin with in the introduction. The day was picture perfect. A brilliant sun was shimming up a clear blue sky. Birds were singing to their heart's content, and the temperature was in the low 50s. My group of hikers, 5 Hope College students and 1 other instructor on a 10-day canoeing and backpacking expedition in the Adirondacks of upstate New York, as part of a May-term course called Ecological Theology and Ethics at Hope College, My group of hikers broke camp and hit the trail toward our evening's destination. As we rounded the bend in a rocky trail, we could not believe what met our eyes. The campsite by the trail was trashed. Litter was everywhere. Half-burned wood from the fire ring was strewn hither and yon. Large pieces of metal, hard to identify exactly where they came from or what they were leaning up against an old log lean-to that was thoroughly inscribed with knife carvings. Birch trees were stripped of their bark all the way around and therefore destined to die. After a long, astonished silence, one of my students uttered the words that were in my mind. What sort of person would do a thing like this? What kind of person would trash such a beautiful place? And with this heartfelt cry, my student, unknowingly, gave voice to an ancient but until recently neglected approach to ethics. Ecological virtue ethics, to be precise. Thomas Hill had a similar experience, famous philosopher. That is, he found himself uttering the same probing question. What sort of person would do a thing like that? In 1983, seems like a long time ago, Hill, a philosopher at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, authored an essay now recognized as pivotal in the development of contemporary environmental virtue ethics. I quote Hill from this now famous essay. A wealthy eccentric bought a house in a neighborhood I know. The house was surrounded by a beautiful display of grass, plants, and flowers, and it was shaded by a huge old avocado tree. But the grass required cutting, the flowers needed tending, and the man wanted more sun. So he cut the whole lot down and covered the entire yard with asphalt. I continue the quote from Thomas Hill's essay. It was a small operation, but it reminded me of the strip mining of large sections of the Appalachians. In both cases, of course, there were reasons for the destruction, and property rights could possibly be cited as justification. But I could not help but wonder, what sort of person would do a thing like that? End quote. This question, notice, evokes not a discussion of duties or rights or consequences, but a focus on character traits, virtues and vices. What kind of person? What character traits, what vices, in this case, allow someone to destroy a beautiful place? And what character traits, virtues, prompt indignation on seeing such a degraded place? And what character traits fuel the desire to make it better? Hill insightfully observes that even if there is a convincing case to be made, based on a careful cost-benefit analysis perhaps, for asphalting over the yard or strip mining the mountain, there's something more at stake, evident in our underlying uneasiness about such destructive action. Something important is missing in asking merely, are the rights or interests of plants neglected? Or what's the intrinsic value of a tree or forest? Hill argues that we must turn from, quote, the effort to find reasons why certain actions destructive of natural environments are morally wrong, to the ancient task of articulating our ideals of human excellence. Rather than argue directly with destroyers of the environment who say, show me why what I'm doing is immoral, Hill argues, I want to ask, what sort of person would want to do what they propose? In short, that again was a quote from Hill, me now. In summary, in short, Hill shifts the terms of the discussion from doing to being, from actions to attitudes, from conduct to character. So this slide, the top part anyway, is my attempt to sort of visually describe. You have a handout here in the room and online. You should see this slide. we have conduct and character, doing and being. On the one side, we have the two main theories, ways people have thought about ethics in the last 300 years, by focusing on duties and rights. In the first case, that's called deontology. It's the fancy Greek etymology, the study of obligation or duty, or consequences. The technical term there for that school of thought is teleology, the logos of telos or teloi, the study of goals and consequences. And frankly, one form of that, called utilitarianism, is the dominant ethic of our age, at least in North America. You want to find out whether something is morally right or wrong, you simply make a judgment as to the potential future consequences. Bad or good, long-term, short-term, for whom is included. It's all about consequences. That's how you determine the moral worth of an action. On the other hand, is this ancient tradition going back to Plato and Aristotle, and actually all over the Christian Bible and the Hebrew Bible and the Quran and other sacred texts, that focuses not on conduct but on character, not on doing but on being. And that has to do with virtues and vices. The fancy term for that is aretiology, the logos of arete, the Greek word for virtue, excellence of character. Now, I take my cue from my friend and colleague at Calvin University. I was going to say Calvin College. Now it's Calvin University. Jamie Smith, who in one of his books makes this claim, and I'm with him on this. What we do is driven by who we are, the kind of person we have become. What we do, conduct, driven by who we are, character, the kind of person we become. So Jamie and I and some other Christian philosophers and theologians and ethicists have been trying to reframe the discussion within professional ethics. I won't go into why it was that deontology and teleology have become the dominant ways of thinking about ethics in the last 350 years, or the history of this revival of aretiology, which is only about 40 years old. But if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. But simply want to say there's this distinction, and I'm trying to reframe ecological ethics by talking about it in terms of virtues and vices, and not only duties, rights, and consequences. I'm not saying those aren't important. They are. Respecting people's rights, caring for their needs, looking at consequences of actions as best we can figure out what those are in the future, because that sometimes is a very difficult thing to do. That's all important. But I want to say what's most important is asking this question: what kind of person do we need to be? I'm not teaching this class, but I've taught a class on basic ethics, actually University of Chicago and lots of other places. The book I use is by my ethics professor, peace to his memory. He died a few years ago, Lewis Smedes at Fuller Seminary. He too grew up in Muskegon, Michigan, where I grew up, just up the road here. Went to Calvin College, Calvin Seminary, the Free University of Amsterdam back in the 50s, and then spent most of his career at Fuller Seminary. I was fortunate enough to be a student of his as he was a few years before he retired. In his book, Choices, Making Right Decisions in a Complex World, it's a real thin book, maybe 100, 110 pages. He lays out, he combines all three of these traditions in a brilliant fashion. He lays out a process for ethical decision-making. Face the facts, respect the rules, consider the consequences, be responsible. There you go. Face the facts. And he has a whole bunch of specific questions. What are the facts? What are the relevant facts as distinct from irrelevant facts? What are the feelings or emotions that come with those supposed facts? So that's the first thing in making any sort of decision. Is this morally or ethically permissible or impermissible, obligatory, etc.? Face the facts. Respect the rules. That's duties and rights. And again, he has specific questions. Well, what rules? Whose rules? Where'd these rules come from? What kind of rules are they? And talking about rights and duties. Consider the consequences. So now he's talking about teleology. And again, consequences short term only or long term? How long term? If you're talking about ecological ethics, are you willing to talk about 100 years from now? 1,000 years from now? Not just 2, 4, 6 year, election cycles? And consequences for what and for whom? Just for you and your family? How about other people? How about people who don't look like you? People in other parts of the world? How about non-human neighbors, as well as our human neighbors? So all kinds of questions there, but the point is, face the facts, respect the rules, consider the consequences, okay, and at the end of the day, be responsible. Be a person of character. And again, Lou lays out a whole bunch of questions to flesh out what that means. How do we know we're acting responsibly? We're being responsible people. So it's a book I commend to you. It's still in print, 30 years after it was published long ago when I was a seminary student in Southern California. So there's Ethics 101 in 10 minutes or less. But if you have this sort of grasp of these are basically, there aren't any other options. There are these 3 theories, and different people advocate them, and different people adopt them, often unknowingly. And Smedes, again, I think brilliantly combines them all. I'm simply saying he's right about the importance of duties, rights, and consequences, but we also need to consider character. And for my money, that's the most important of these theories. Okay. You have something to write on. That green piece of paper should have a blank back to it. And you have something to write with, I hope. Likewise, online folks, you need to find a piece of paper and get a pen or a pencil. We've got a little writing exercise here. I'd like for you to think about this question. Identify a person you admire. Write that person's name down. You're not going to share that name with anybody. And then list her or his character traits. What are the virtues, the character traits that distinguish this person? And you got 2 or 3 minutes to think about that. Write the name down and then just start listing some of the character traits of this person that you admire. Okay, likewise, folks online, name of a person that you admire and a list of character traits. Just 3 or 4. More if you wish, but just a few traits you admire in this person. Go to it.
Steve, while they're doing that, I have someone in the chat that would like you to restate the book title by Smedes, please.
Yeah, the book by Smedes is called Choices. The subtitle is Making Right Decisions in a Complex World. I think it's published by Harper and Row. I don't recall. I could be wrong on that. And it would have been published, the date of publication, back in the 80s or early 90s. Smedes, Lewis, Lewis, Smedes, Smedes. He was tall. He looked like your stereotypical West Michigan Dutchman. Had great sense of humor, brilliant scholar, wonderful writer. He writes for a wide audience, not just Christians. In this book especially, as I said, I've used it at secular universities in teaching ethics courses. I still remember the day I was in his class. We had a break. He turned and looked at me and said, "So what are you going to do with the rest of your life?" Like cutting right to the chase. So. All right, everybody had enough time? Jot down a name and some character traits. All right, let's start in person, and then we'll invite the rest of the folks who are online as well. You don't have to mention the name, you may if you wish, but I'm just curious. Normally it would be small groups, but it's hard to do that virtually. Any character traits you want to share about this person that you admire? What virtues popped up? And Judy's got the mic, so. Constancy, okay. And
Perception.
Okay, say a little bit more. What do you mean by perception?
Perceiving the situation, the people around her. She's actually a fitness trainer.
Okay, so insight and discernment.
Into people around her.
Okay.
And compassion.
Okay. Compassio, the ability to feel with another. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
I found this person to be very enthusiastic.
Okay.
Curious.
Uh-huh.
Open-minded.
Mm-hmm.
Had a definite concern for others. She was joyful.
Okay.
She made you feel that joy.
Okay.
Shared it. And she's sharing, knowledgeable,
Uh-huh.
and a true Christian.
Okay, that's quite a list. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The others want to volunteer some traits of their friend, David.
That one here, David.
Totally committed to the journey of seeking justice.
Hmm.
And fearless about it.
Okay. And that is a journey, is it not? That's interesting, your language there. Not just seeking justice, but the journey of justice. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else here in the room? List of, yeah, Terry? Virtues?
Call it transegoic, beyond the I to the we and the all.
Okay.
Really does combine all four. And engaged and empowered. He's engaged with people.
Okay.
And he's very empowering with others.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Online folks, if you would unmute yourself. We should be able to hear you. Character traits that you listed that characterize one of your moral exemplars. Anyone?
Hi, this is Karen.
Yeah.
The traits that I wrote down for this individual was they were full of wisdom from their experience and their learning. They were very caring, supportive, helpful, almost sacrificial, and they were there to serve. But I think the part that I really liked out of this person is that they were patient. They gathered information. They helped you walk through to a good conclusion. But they always said, "So what would that look like tomorrow?" So it's kind of like pick up your stuff. As a child, this person would say to us kids on the street, "What are you leaving behind you when you leave this place?" anything that doesn't belong there, you need to take care of. Just very much think about the future for this
Yeah.
situation.
Future oriented. What are the consequences for the future? What are
Yeah.
you leaving behind for those who come after you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. Someone else online.
I put respect.
Ready?
Yes, respectful, accepting, knowledgeable, authentic, compassionate, and honest.
Wow, that's quite a list. You've been blessed if you've been around that person. Thank you.
Steve, here's one. Determined, thoughtful, kind, and open-minded.
Determined, thoughtful, kind, and open-minded. That's you, Dave?
Right.
Okay. Determined, kind, thoughtful, open-minded. Wonderful. Thank you. Someone else? Anyone else online?
This is Sue. I'm thinking of someone who's able to see an issue and approaching it in a totally different way so that she can meet success. And I'm thinking about equal pay for men and women.
Okay. So a kind of creativity about seeing problems, being insightful.
A different approach.
Different approaches. Is the proverbial think outside the box.
Yeah, outside box.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else online want to share what you wrote? I'm not sure what that ping meant. Anyone else? Yeah, he just said something. Okay. All right. All right, we've talked about the three main theories in ethics. Let me say a little bit more about virtue and flesh out this description here at the bottom of your handout or the bottom of the slide for those of you who are online. What we do is driven by who we are, by the kind of person we become. Furthermore, the kind of person we become depends on the stories with which we identify. We are, to use the words of one contemporary scholar, Jonathan Gottschall, we are, quote, the storytelling animal. What does this mean? Well, Barbara Kingsolver, one of my favorite contemporary novelists, puts it well. Storytelling, she writes, is as old as our need to remember where the water is, where the best food grows, where we find our courage to hunt. Contrary to what many believe, stories are useful beyond mere entertainment. Indeed, stories are, according to Kingsolver, I quote, as persistent as our desire to teach our children how to live in this place that we've known longer than they have. Narratives engage that part of us that most shapes our desires, namely our imagination. Stories, including legends, myths, plays, novels, and films, best speak to this imaginative core of our being because they paint a more affective, sensible, even aesthetic picture than do lectures or textbooks. I'm quoting again Barbara Kingsolver. And as many biblical commentators have remarked, Jesus was onto something in using parables for the instruction of his followers. Whole books have been written on why Jesus chose that particular strategy to talk to his followers, his disciples. So stories shape our character, and all human action is shaped in terms of narratively formed character. Alistair MacIntyre, a contemporary Scottish philosopher, actually one of the starters of 30 years ago now, of this movement to reclaim virtue ethics. He puts it this way: I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I can answer the prior question of what story or stories do I find myself a part. I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I can answer the prior question of what story do I find myself a part. In other words, a founding story is not a husk that can be shucked to get to the kernel inside, but is indispensable to knowing who we are. Contemporary ethicist, Duke University, ethicist Stanley Hauerwas puts it this way: we do not tell stories simply because they provide us a more colorful way to say what can be said in a different way, but because there is no other way we can articulate the richness of intentional activity. Storytelling is the only way to get at that kind of truth, in other words. So there's a narrative quality, quoting one of my U of Chicago professors, Paul Ricoeur. There's a narrative quality to human action. So virtue is a narratively formed, praiseworthy character trait. That's the kind of initial start to this definition of a virtue. It's a praiseworthy character trait that's formed by stories. But we find ourselves living, at least I'll speak for myself, living in a world of competing narratives, competing stories, competing understandings of what virtuous living looks like. For example, one strand of folk wisdom states that cleanliness is next to godliness. I heard that growing up. I suspect some of you did too, right? But what exactly is cleanliness? Well, that depends on what narratives shape your home. An American family shaped by the 1950s medically inspired preoccupation with germs and sanitation will have a very different idea of cleanliness than a family in Belize in Central America now or in 2015 when I wrote this book. Indeed, Jesus found himself in a lot of trouble over a matter of cleanliness. Remember what's going on there in the Gospels, right? Because he in some ways understood the story of the Jewish covenant differently from those Pharisees who were all about cleanliness, but Jesus defined it very differently. Yeah, cleanliness next to godliness, but what does that mean? Depends on the narratives, the stories. We may agree that it's good to be clean, but the stories we indwell give us different understandings of what that actually means. In addition, virtues are shaped by practices. Hauerwas and Burrell, two contemporary writers, put it this way: in allowing ourselves to adopt and be adopted by a particular story, we are in fact assuming a set of practices that will shape the ways we relate to our world and its desires. Within the indwelling of a particular story comes a particular set of practices, communal embodied rhythms and routines that shape and mold our dispositions. In other words, the meta-narratives are big stories we hear and with which we identify, for example, of manifest destiny, of material prosperity, of an outrageous carpenter from Nazareth, to give three rather different examples. These shape our character by enlisting us to engage in certain practices. Reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, perhaps in the case of the story about manifest destiny. Or shopping at the mall, in the case of the story about material prosperity. Or maybe saying the Lord's Prayer, or reciting the Apostles' Creed, in the case of the narrative about this outrageous carpenter from Nazareth. In other words, practices shape the kind of person we become. Virtues and vices, both ways, right? And hence the actions we engage in. And sometimes we see practices embodied in a person, getting back to your little writing exercise, who displays for us what a life of virtue concretely looks like. For example, a well-known saint such as Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or a well-loved, if little-known relative like good old Uncle Bob. You have an Uncle Bob in your life? Or maybe it's Aunt Susan, someone that no one else knows about except your family members, but someone who everyone looks up to because they're the kind of people who embody the virtues you all just described. Such people are models of virtue who inspire us to live lives ourselves, such lives ourselves. So we alter our own narratives by cultivating the virtues of our most admired exemplars. People like, in the case of matters ecological, Aldo Leopold or Henry David Thoreau or John Muir or Rachel Carson, author of Silent Spring. So stories and practices and exemplars shape character. But furthermore, our practices over time color the way we see ourselves and the world. So there's a connection between virtue and vision. Contemporary ethicist Gil Meilander teaches at Valparaiso University, not far from here, puts it this way, I quote, "What duties we perceive and even what dilemmas we discern may depend upon what virtues shape our vision of the world," end quote. And we see the world differently depending on how we've been formed by the virtues that constitute our character. C.S. Lewis captures this point, I think, very well in his book 6, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Magician's Nephew. The creation of Narnia by Aslan, the lion, looks and feels very different for wicked Uncle Andrew than it does for the children. While the children find Narnia alluring and understand the words spoken by the animals, Uncle Andrew shrinks back in fear and hears only barking and howling. Because of his evil, his vicious character, he's blind to what the children see, and he misconstrues both Aslan, the good creator, and what is created, Narnia. The narrator very astutely comments, I quote, "For what you see and hear depends a good deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are," end quote. What you see and hear, in other words, depends to a certain degree on our character. So all by way of background, to get to this summary of something you've known about your whole life, even if you've never thought much about it. What then is a virtue? Summary, the bottom of page 17. I've just been reading a few selections from the opening chapter. A virtue is a story-shaped, praiseworthy character trait formed by practices over time that disposes us to act in certain ways, certain good ways. It's a habitual disposition to act with excellence, to paraphrase Aristotle, one of his books long ago, molded by the narratives we identify with and the exemplars, the moral role models we follow. By soaking in the stories of particular communities, engaging in their practices, and looking to their role models, we know what is truly good and how to live well. Let's take a short break. Any questions or comments? This is all, again, sort of Ethics 101 by way of background before we dive into a deeper look at wonder and humility as two specific ecological virtues. Any comments or questions, including anyone online, about anything I've said so far, especially anything on this slide or the handout?
I have just a question of what you're thinking about here with this. So, do you think somebody who had one disposition could change by practicing new thoughts and new responses and new actions to develop an opposite virtue?
Yeah, I think so. I'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, especially. Yeah, virtues, they're habitual dispositions, as are vices. And most of us, I suspect, when we start thinking about this, we identify certain virtues and vices in our own lives, if we're honest. Not just virtues, but vices. And think about how can I cultivate the virtues and extinguish the vices? What can I do? What habits can I develop? What practices can I choose to engage in that will make me less impatient, for example, and increase the virtue of patience or forbearance? What habits, what actual practices can I start to engage in intentionally in order to become someone who is maybe more compassionate? So these are things we can work on. Again, try to extinguish the vices and cultivate and foster and encourage the growth of certain virtues, which implies that for most of us, most of the time, that's not going to happen overnight, but it is something that we can work on.
Do you think that perception then where you're at that time actually affects or maybe even alters the reality of what someone is seeing and hearing? So for example, one family member takes the comment and hears it and sees it with things that two other family members don't see or hear the same thing.
I'm sure that's only happened in your family and not in anyone else's. And everyone here is laughing because, of course, we can all think of examples where it's a great example of people interpreting the same thing differently for a variety of reasons, but possibly also because one person is interpreting it because of certain virtues they embody, and another person is interpreting it very differently, in part because of certain vices that they embody. So I think that's a good example. We can probably all come up with some examples like that, maybe especially with Thanksgiving coming up, when all those family members are seated around the same Thanksgiving table. And the standard wisdom is, right, there are two things you don't talk about.
Yeah.
One of them being religion.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving Day table, because you're liable to get in a fight or an argument with your cousins or your aunts and uncles. So.
Or it's the 5 different ways the same story is told, and each one believing that their way is the gospel truth.
Yeah, that's right. Which raises the issue of, are we willing to be humble, right? And accept the fact that maybe my version isn't the only or best version. Certainly not necessarily the true version. Am I willing to be open to listen to other versions, other perspectives? And that requires a bit of intellectual humility. Rather than thinking that, I'm always right. I have the God's eye view of the universe. Well, sorry, none of us have that view, because we're finite and we're fallible. So we have 2 reasons to think that maybe our claims to truth might not be accurate. Great question.
Thank you.
Have another one here. Okay.
Just an observation. I feel like the enduring result of character in our family of origin is what Karen's talking about too, and the idea of moving toward change in our practices, and how helpful the current mindfulness trend is.
Yeah. My wife, if she were here, she's a marriage and family therapist, would simply say amen. And probably some other things too, but I mean, that's one of the premises of that whole way of doing psychological therapy, right? Is that we are, for better and worse, products of our families, virtues and vices, and we need to acknowledge that. And there may be some issues we need to work through with a professional who will help us come to terms with our family of origin. So, thank you. Yeah, Don.
Excuse me. Well, I think you've already addressed this in part, but I'm struck by the idea in this definition of virtue that it's a community-developed thing, right? I mean, stories, by definition, are between people,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And the exemplars we follow.
Yeah.
Yet, no matter how narrowly we define community, Holland, Michigan, or a family, or a spouse, different people wind up with different virtues.
They do.
And vices. So,
Yeah.
Is that a genetic thing? Is it random dice rolling? What's the additional dimension besides the community, which is forming one's virtue?
Well, it's a great question, and it raises the issue that certainly there are multiple factors. There are many communities. I look back in my own life, family is one community, church is another, multiple churches. Academic communities, in my case, having Toronto, Los Angeles, Chicago, I could very easily identify the ways in which those communities, and they were all Christian communities in my case, have shaped me in certain ways. Being in Hope College, again, that's another community, living in Holland, Michigan. So there's no simple answer. I think it's a complex process, this process of each of us being shaped in certain ways, again, through different narratives, different practices, different family systems, different geographical locations, the languages we learn, all those things factor in. And again, you can have two very different people come out of the same family. Most of us probably have examples of that. My brother and I, 4.5 years apart, were similar in certain ways, but very different in other ways, in terms of character. So is it nature, nurture, it's some combination? Ferreting all that out is very complicated business.
Some of that, I think any parent knows, they can begin to recognize at age 1 or 2.
Can you repeat what the classroom participant said?
Yeah, so yeah, we as parents, we know if we have children, again, sometimes even in the womb, we know they're different. My wife would tell you that anyway. We have 3 daughters. Each of them were different before they're even born in some sense. So again, it's a great question. Many people have asked, again, it often comes up with the nature versus nurture. You know, how much is it genetic? How much of it is socialization of various sorts by different groups, not just families, but again, countries, cities, all the stories that form each of those communities. So it's a great question. All of us are formed in very complex ways. Other questions before we dive into wonder and humility? Yes?
I grew up fundamentalist Baptist.
So did I.
And it was all about duties.
Uh-huh.
And consequences of not doing your duties.
Yeah.
There was no focus on virtue in my upbringing.
Yeah. And yet I bet most of the people in your church, if they're anything like mine, probably knew Paul's fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5 by heart. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Guess what? Those are all virtues.
I know, but they didn't pay attention.
So, yeah, you are not alone, and not just fundamentalist Baptists, but other Protestants, and talk to my Roman Catholic friends and yours. Often we get hung up, I think we Christians, too hung up on duties and obligations, and not enough on virtues and vices. Okay. Is there another question? No? Okay. Let's turn to wonder and humility in the time we have left. And I don't wear a watch, so I'm keeping track of the time here with my smartphone. Let me begin with a story. We've been on the road for 12 hours. On a hot August day, I and my co-leader, Heidi, and 10 high school students had packed ourselves in 8 days' worth of personal gear into a 15-passenger van. And now traveling north from Chicago, we were on our last leg, winding our way from Ely, Minnesota, east on Fernburg Road to the Outfitters Place on Moose Lake. We're in the boundary waters of Canoe Area Wilderness Area in northern Minnesota. As we turned from the pavement onto a one-lane dirt road, I rolled down the driver's window, felt the cool night breeze on my skin, and took a deep, pine-scented breath that smelled fresh and clean. After a mile or so, we finally came to a stop in the parking lot of Canadian Border Outfitters. I opened the door, literally stumbled out of the van, and looked up. To this day, this is over 40 years ago. Decades later, in my mind's eye, I can see that night sky. I had never before in my life seen so many stars, and so brightly shining. The stars were beyond counting and so brilliant it seemed I could reach up and touch them. On this cool, crystal clear night, with no light pollution for miles and miles, the stars evoked wonder. Everyone in that trusty old van, even the teenage boys who were well practiced in, quote, being cool and not expressing emotion, they had the same reaction, slack-jawed awe and an immediate and involuntary ah. Emblazoned in my memory is that night, the first, thank God, of many over the years that I would spend paddling and camping in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northeastern Minnesota. With this sense of amazement came a sense of my own smallness. I was both astonished and humbled, struck by wonder and overcome with humility. In the vast expanse of space, with those lights in the sky literally taking me back in time. I'd had 2 years of physics at Hope College. I knew what those lights meant, traveling the speed of light. I was literally looking back in time. Millions of years it took for some of those lights to reach my eyeballs. I felt like an insignificant nothing, a dot in some pointillist painting. A line from Psalm 8 popped into my head. What are human? What is ha-adam, the Hebrew? What are human beings that you are mindful of them, O God? Indeed, what are we humans in the vast expanse of God's mind-boggling universe? We are humble humans from the humus, to paraphrase Genesis 2. That's what the Hebrew says. This is the Latin version, humble humans from the humus, on a tiny planet, in one solar system, among many, in a galaxy of enormous size, in a universe that is literally beyond our imagination. Wonder and humility, conjured by this expanse of the heavens on a clear summer night. Later that same trip, we were treated to an amazing display of the aurora borealis, the first time I can recall ever watching the northern lights. Visible on the northwest horizon, this atmospheric event induced yet more wonder as we watched the colors dance and whirl and play. In the words of Sigurd Olsen, the bard of the Boundary Waters, I quote, "The lights of the aurora moved and shifted over the horizon. Sometimes there were shafts of yellow tinged with green, then masses of evanescence that moved from east to west and back again. Great streamers of bluish-white zigzagged like a trembling curtain from one end of the sky to the other. Streaks of yellow and orange and red shimmered along the flowing borders. Never for a moment were they still, fading until they were almost completely gone, only to dance forth again in renewed splendor with infinite combinations and startling patterns of design." End quote. I've never read a description better than that one of the Northern Lights. Spellbinding, those Northern Lights were an evocation of wonder. And every night on that canoe trip, we would look to the north in search of another such celestial illumination. Already our appetite was whetted for more. All right, you have a handout. And now folks on online have the last of my 3 slides. Let's talk a little bit about wonder and humility. Some wonderings about wonder. When it comes to literature on wonder in the natural world, the first name that comes to mind for many people is Rachel Carson. Though best known for her last and most famous book, Silent Spring, one of the most important books ever written about environmental issues, quite frankly. And boy, did she take the heat as a woman scientist back in 1960s. Whew! Carson wrote many other books, including, the one I focus on here, The Sense of Wonder. If you haven't read it, go to the library. We have it here in town. Originally published under the title, Help Your Child to Wonder. This slim volume is, as the original title suggests, designed to help parents foster wonder among their children or grandchildren. I have a long quote I'm not going to read, but it talks about wonder. It's the antidote, though, to boredom and disenchantment. Wonder has to do with a sense of the beautiful, an excitement for the novel, the unknown, a feeling of sympathy and admiration, even love for the object of one's attention. And I'm breaking a bit of new ground here. Most people don't consider wonder a virtue, but after rereading Rachel Carson, she assumes it is. It's something you can grow and develop over time. And somehow we lose it. Most children have it, and we lose it through schooling or whatever, but it's something that you can cultivate. So I take it, it's a virtue. Annie Dillard, another famous American writer, also has her eye on wonder. Her award-winning book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, is, among other things, a treasure trove of musings on wonder. I encourage you to read that book, put that on your Christmas list. So what is it? As a noun, it's anything that causes astonishment. Here, I'm the slide and also the top number 1 list here on this on the handout. Anything that causes astonishment. A wonder is some event as a noun, event or place or thing that evokes amazement. It's a wonder you weren't killed, we may say after miraculous escape from a dangerous automobile accident. Iguazu Falls is one of the wonders of the world, we exclaim after visiting this spectacular series of waterfalls on the border between Paraguay and Brazil. Put that on your bucket list. We saw it when my middle daughter was a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay. Went down to visit her, and we made sure we got to see Iguazu Falls. As a verb, wonder denotes a state of amazement or astonishment evoked by that which is beyond what we expect or think possible. And that's the definition you have on your handout, or you online folks have on the screen. Wonder is rapt attention in the presence of something awe-inspiringly mysterious or novel. There are different kinds, which I don't have time to get into, but it's also a virtue. It's this disposition of attentiveness, awareness, and openness to what is new. And this is number 2 here. To what is novel or new or beyond our expectations, the cultivated capacity to be amazed or astonished. Its vices are insensibility and misplaced wonder. I don't have time to talk about that. Insensible, it's an Aristotelian virtue of the inability to ever be amazed or astonished at anything. And what I call misplaced wonder, to be amazed at the wrong things. So, we'll come back to ecological wonder. Let me talk a little bit about humility. I'm humble and proud of it. Anyone ever told you that? Right? So goes the one-liner about humility. I'm humble and proud of it. Being humble is not something about which you can be proud lest you fall afoul of what philosophers call a purported self-contradiction. The very claim to be proud of your humility proves you are not, in fact, humble. Or maybe you've heard this. I got this one from my friend Dave Myers, my next-door neighbor, social psychologist here at Hope. He calls it the humble brag. It's a boast disguised as a complaint. Like, I've got to stop saying yes to every interview request. Maybe that's one Dave coined himself because he's probably Hope's most famous professor. We seem to want to at least appear humble, but what exactly is humility? Well, there are 2 vices. Pride, or vanity, is one. Inordinate or unjustified self-esteem, while undue humility is insufficient or unjustifiable low self-image. I think there's a kind of proper pride here, proper humility. Humility is that habitual disposition that prevents us from thinking we are worthy of something we are not. So pride and self-deprecation is the name I have for the vice here. So modest and honest assessment of your abilities and accomplishments. You're honest. I'm good at this, I'm not good at that. These are my virtues, these are my vices. The settled disposition, the virtue of humility now, to estimate our abilities and capacities properly. Again, with honesty, acknowledging what we're good at, not being self-deprecating, saying I'm not good at anything, but also not saying you're really good at something you're not good at. Settled disposition to estimate our abilities and capacities properly. Its vices are overweening pride. The Greek term here is hubris, which is at the center of every tragedy, whether Greek or Roman or contemporary. There's some prideful individual, and that results in all hell breaking loose, typically, in that movie or film or novel. And self-deprecation. So let's focus now on ecological wonder. And I have a large section in this chapter about What can we learn from the Bible? Biblical insight into wonder and humility I'm skipping over for the sake of time. So wonder, again, is a settled disposition to stand in rapt attention and amazement in the presence of something awe-inspiring, mysterious, or novel. The vice is insensibility and misplaced wonder. Here are some examples of misplaced wonder. Fawning over celebrities, admiring astonishment at the latest military weaponry, awestruck veneration of the new shopping mall. Awe is misplaced, astonishment misdirected, many would argue. Wonder is warped. The virtue of ecological wonder now. I argue, and the definition is here on the slide or on your handout, the settled disposition to stand in rapt attention and enthralled amazement in the presence of the awe-inspiring natural world. This ecological virtue names the capability of grateful amazement at the world of wonders God has made, that God sustains, and that God is remaking, redeeming. And so ecological insensibility is the vice, the inability to be amazed by the wonders of the world. No night sky, however beautiful, can move such a person to slack-jawed wonder. No orchid display, no dancing sandhill crane, no acrobatic dusky dolphin can bring us to marvel and be amazed if we are insensible. To the ecologically insensible, the natural world is flat, uniform, monochrome. The acids of modernity or the suspicions of postmodernity have drained the ability to wonder from those who exhibit this vice. Ecological wonder. Amazement, astonishment, again, in the presence of some of those things I just mentioned, all of which I've had the privilege of seeing. Dancing sandhill cranes, acrobatic dusky dolphins from a kayak off the coast of New Zealand. But you don't need to go to New Zealand. We can just look at the beautiful maple trees that surround us here. As on my walk over to this building, I was astonished by the loveliness, the wonder of the world around us. Humility. We talked about humility and the virtue of humility. What is ecological humility? The settled disposition to act in such a way that we know our place, our oikos, Greek word, our home, and we fit harmoniously into it. Whether it's our local community, Holland, Michigan, our bioregion, our biome, this part of the upper Midwest, or our home planet. If we're ecologically humble, we acknowledge we're finite and fallen, finite and fallible. And thus we have an honest and accurate estimation of our abilities and capacities, for good and ill. This requires not only self-knowledge and knowledge of the world in which we live, but also awareness of the limits of our knowledge. I live in a world where lots of people are very smart and make lots of claims about knowledge, and I'm constantly reminded of how ignorant we really are. I thought I knew a lot when I graduated from Hope with a bachelor's degree in math, computer science, and physics, and I get to graduate school in Toronto and find out how ignorant I really was. And then the MDiv at Fuller Seminary, another master's degree, I learned a lot of good stuff, Hebrew and Greek and the rest, but I still learned how ignorant, how much I didn't know. And to cap it off, the PhD at Chicago, oh mercy, all these smart people who know all these things, and how little I and everyone know. It's been an education in increasing awareness of ignorance. And I can see Socrates and Plato and the Hebrew prophets and all the rest saying amen. We have good reason to be humble. We're finite, individually and collectively, and we're fallible. We're fallen. There are deep impulses not to acknowledge our own ignorance. So, we frankly acknowledge our limited ability to know the future consequences of our actions. And we have an honest awareness of our penchant for self-deception. Before making decisions, if we embody ecological humility, we survey as many consequences as possible. We explore alternatives. We seek out blind spots. We consider worst-case scenarios. If we're ecologically humble, we act cautiously. Ecological arrogance, one of the vices, puts us cocky and confident at the center of the universe. And so, thinking we know everything, we cut corners with the wildlife conservation program. Despite the manifest evidence of both unforeseen and unintended consequences and our own ignorance, we go too fast on that water reclamation project. Assuming the only value of some animal, plant, or place is its usefulness for us, we put a price tag on, quote, environmental resources, according to their, quote, economic utility. Because of our individual and collective arrogance, the natural world of which we humans are an integral part, it suffers. Ecological self-deprecation is the other vice. This diminishes the role of humans as earthkeepers. If we're captured by this vice, we undervalue the important place of humans as caretakers of creation and responsible agents of change for the good. We sometimes talk as if the world would be better off without us, that we're a virus, a plague, a scourge upon the earth. I have a footnote here to a book that describes humans exactly that way. We're a scourge, we're a virus. We need to extinguish ourselves, so this author argues. We fail to see how, with this vice, how we humans have a legitimate and significant role to play in caring for the earth. Let me stop there. Questions? We have 8 minutes, according to my phone. So questions?
Question.
Okay.
Comment.
All right, that's fine too.
In our lectionary just a few weeks ago, we read God's answer to Job.
Yes.
And he was inviting Job to wonder about creation.
Yes.
And at the end, Job couldn't say anything because his humility was exercised.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a part of the Old Testament that very few people, I think, are aware of. But lectionary readings, one of the great advantages of that is it gets you through the Bible, the whole Bible, Old and New Testament, on a regular cycle. So those texts that we either don't like or would prefer not to read show up. Yeah, they're tucked at the very end of the book of Job, with this long conversation about good and evil and why do bad things happen to good people and so on. There's this voice from the whirlwind, God's voice. Where were you, Job, when I made creation? And God literally putting Job in his place. After which, this is chapters 38 and following, right? After which Job says, little old me, I'm just a human. Translating the Hebrew loosely. I give in. I wasn't there. I'm a humble human from the humus, and I have to acknowledge that. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a great text. Other questions?
From the chat.
I noticed that you referenced the fact that you studied math and physics.
Yeah, math, computer science major was my official major, but I had 2 years of physics. I was going to major in physics too.
Maybe you can understand this comment or thought. I think one of the greatest failures of how we teach mathematics in school is we deprive people of a powerful sense of wonder and understanding math, not algorithms.
It's about to the end, but it's been very difficult to hear him. They have it.
Oops, someone coming in.
Okay, so can you repeat?
Well, here, let's just do this.
Yeah, give him your mic. There you go.
This will work. Go ahead, Don.
So I was commenting to Steve that his admission to having studied math and computer science as an undergraduate reminds me, as someone who did as well, that I find it very difficult to share a particular sense of wonder about nature, which I think can only be expressed and understood in a real understanding of math. I mean, anybody who looks at an exponential graph and doesn't stand in wonder just hasn't really been taught well about or chaos theory or emergent divergence and all that sort of stuff.
Before I get the mic back, you're a teacher, former teacher. What did you do in your teaching practice to try to help your students engage them and decrease their capacity for wonder?
Well, I refused to teach them fractions for the 5th time, figuring I wasn't going to have any more success as the previous 4 teachers, and actually introduced these kinds of subjects, which as I was teaching and computers came more into the classroom, the use of computers gave students capacities far beyond learning algorithms about fractions, and it was fun to see that happen.
Was it Isaac Newton that said that mathematics is the language of God?
Yes, he did. You have a really good memory about that.
I have nothing in the chat, so if anyone would like to unmute themselves to ask a question or make a comment, go ahead.
Okay. Any last questions? We're almost out of time. I have one last little story I'd like to conclude with. Mathematics for me, just to briefly comment on your question, it was a way of I think, increasing my wonder, especially in college. I had calculus in high school, and it went right into differential equations and linear algebra as a first-year student at Hope, and I was in over my head, but I did okay. But it was fascinating then, to take physics courses, because, calculus was invented to solve physics problems. And again, talking about exponential curves and so on, that was really insightful. I regret that I didn't take more biology classes. Take ornithology from Eldon Gray, peace to his memory. How many people I knew, classmates, who took that class and they've been birders the rest of their life. Amateur maybe, not professional, but the love of birds and being outdoors that was an infectious part of him in all his classes. So, oh well. I don't use any computer science skills. Those machines were as big as this room, and now your smartphone has more computing capacity than the Xerox Sigma 6 computer that I used to run third shift for my job junior year at Hope, backing everything up. This machine literally about as big as this room that now, none of that. Writing Fortran programs, no one does that anymore. So.
And still we teach fractions.
Yeah, what is 15/16 and all that kind of stuff, yeah. Well, let me conclude, we're almost out of time, with the capstone story to the one I began with. What sort of person revisited? The day was picture perfect. A brilliant sun was shimming up a clear blue sky. The robins and cardinals were singing to their heart's content. And the temperature was in the low 50s. This is in May. That's a good temperature where we are here in the Adirondacks. My group of hikers, Hope College students, and one other instructor on the May term course called Ecological Theology and Ethics, we broke camp and hit the trail toward our evening's destination. Late in the day, after many miles on the rocky trail, we rounded the bend and could not believe what met our eyes. The campsite by the trail was absolutely beautiful. There was no litter in sight. A stack of firewood was neatly placed next to a small fire ring. The old log lean-to was in tip-top condition. Tall white pines provided a protective canopy overhead. And after a long, astonished silence, I'm not making this up, one of my students uttered the words in my mind, "What kind of people would have done this?" In other words, what kind of respectful, humble, loving people must have cared for this place over many years? With this heartfelt affirmation, my student gave voice to exactly what I was thinking. And she also gave voice to an important way of thinking about ethics, ecological virtue ethics? What kind of person? In this case, what kind of people would have been respectful, kind, humble, loving, enough to care for this not trashed, but beautiful place? Thank you for your attention. I hope to see you back next week. We'll, again, take a deep dive into the 2 following chapters that focus on each of them 2 more of these ecological virtues.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.